Everybody there?
Yeah.
Seeing some people come in. All right, looks like people are coming in. We'll get started here in a few minutes.
Do I have 5? Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got lots to cover today in working with buyers. I'm going back for the benefit of this recording. I'm going back and doing our basic working with buyers workshop that we've done literally over the last 10 years and for the benefit of our newer agents. So then we'll also have a recording of this. Please interrupt me if you have questions. You can unmute yourself and yell at me, or you can use the chat down at the bottom right of your screen, or if you have your camera on, just start waving and we'll call on you. Okay, so the plan today is we're going to go through our buyer booklet, and Danny and I, we pulled it up this morning from our website, and we're going to go through this, and then I'm going to give you a couple of stories in working with buyers that I've experienced over the years. So this is the website. If for those new agents, these are all the downloads that we have. And if you click on that buyer booklet, you'll get an outline of our program today. I'm hoping that all of you will make up a buyer booklet personally and have a stack of them for the buyers that you're working with. All of the information that you'll see today and all the pages are in a Word doc format so that you can edit them and add and personalize them with your own pictures. The idea with our booklets, our buyer booklets and seller booklets, and we actually have a series of 5 additional buyer booklets and 5 seller booklets, and the idea is that you'll print out a few of each of these so that each time you meet with a buyer or a seller, you can educate them by giving them another booklet on a different topic. So this is kind of like the first booklet when you first meet with a buyer and you sit down with them and kind of go through what you can do to help them find a home. And you'll see in my workshop today that I format this a lot like working with sellers, and that everybody knows that, you know, when a potential seller calls you up and says, hey, I'm thinking about selling, you make the appointment, you go over and you sit down with them and you kind of explain what the process is of selling their house. It's the same with a buyer. You use this booklet, and in this booklet, as we'll go through today, you'll have your personal service agreement. So a lot like with a seller, when you list a house, you're telling the seller, these are all the great things I'm going to do for you and why you should work with me and TRG in representing you. That's the same for the buyer. This personal service agreement lists out There's about 20 items there of the different things that you're going to go through. Why don't, Danny, why don't we just kind of go through the booklet page by page. This is the actual booklet. That prior page, what was all the downloads that you can use to edit it. And if you notice on the cover here, this was actually this was done over 10 years ago at our other address when we were down over on Torrance Boulevard. This is before Danny, and this is my old logo, which was Experience a World of Difference. So, you know, everybody should have their marketing and their branding, and definitely have a profile page that you add to any of your handouts. But the thing is about these booklets is that other than personalizing or printing in color, maybe I should say, the front page and your profile as the last page, everything else that's in this booklet and the other dozen plus booklets that we have online are generic. So you can print them out, you can have these booklets bound and not have to worry about redoing these every time you're meeting a potential buyer or a seller. So in this one, back then I actually personalized these, but I would just put in here dear buyer or dear potential buyer or dear real estate home buyer, whatever, as your generic salutation there for this letter. So again, this is in a Word format, so you can change anything that you want in this. But you want to make these generic so that you'll use them, and you won't be concerned about having to do all this work when you're going to meet your buyer. And then this is where you'll spend most of your time, just like when you're dealing with a seller. You have your marketing plan that you go over with your seller. Well, with your buyer, you have this personal service agreement. And these are the steps that you are going to tell your buyer that I'm going to go through to help you find your new home. Okay, so any questions or anything that we have? Any comments? All right, I'm just going to keep going on. So let me backtrack a little bit. Normally in my workshop, I'm going to be asking questions, but I know it's hard to get feedback from a lot of the agents, so I'm just going to kind of go through this. What's typical with a buyer is that you're going to get a referral from someone that says, hey, I'm looking to find a property, or you may meet somebody and says, yeah, I'm thinking about buying something. And so you need to be able to have a canned response to that in order to make an appointment. Something like, oh, great, let me explain how I work. Can I meet with you this afternoon, or would tomorrow be better? Whatever your canned response is, but you've got to sit them down for an appointment. And what I've been doing for the last 10 years is that before we even meet with them, is I'll refer them to Jonathan, refer them to a lender to get them pre-approved. And especially in times like today, where there's a lot more buyers than sellers out there. In fact, we've been experiencing 5 to 10 offers on every listing, every new listing that we have in the company. So that means there's 5 times the buyers out there as we have properties. So it's incumbent upon you to weed through these buyers so that you can only work with the best buyers that are available out there. And one of the questions I always ask is how many buyers do you think you can work with at a time? I know that I can work with 5 to 10 sellers, especially in a market like this, because we have our systems down pretty well, where we order signs, we schedule open houses when we can, we schedule appointments during COVID, and we can do that with 5 to 10 listings easily. And that includes doing paperwork and everything for them. Working with 5 to 10 buyers is a lot more difficult because to be effective with them, you've got to have almost daily communication with them, and to be able to schedule appointments and get stuff done. So you want to make sure that if you're going to be spending this amount of time for these buyers, that they're serious buyers. And typically it's been my experience that a lot of times buyers have to put offers in a market like this, and not get their home before they realize that they have to offer, they have to come in strong, they have to have an offer that looks really good, and have all their ducks in a row so that that presentation of that offer is the best one for that seller. And I'll be glad to help any of you on an individual basis on any of the buyers that you're working with. I'll be glad to review any of your offers prior to signatures so that we can make them look as good as possible. It's been my experience, especially with my middle son, Billy. He bought his first condo. This was about 10 years ago when there were a lot of short sales, and he was what's typical for a lot of first-time buyers. He was an FHA buyer, putting the minimum amount down, and we were competing against all of these cash buyers buying these short sales. We probably wrote about 10 offers before we finally got one to bite, and it was a short sale that we were able to get, but we came in strong. We came in over a list price. We tightened all of our time frames down. We already had a pre-approval, and we were able to remove all conditions within a week. And there's no reason why any of you can't do that with your buyers if you get them pre-approved and have everything, all the paperwork done ahead of time. That's difficult if you're meeting somebody today and they want to look at properties. That's not going to happen. And let me preface this by saying that do what I do what I tell you to do, not what I do all the time, because there's many times when Danny or I will get a referral from a friend, a family member, and they'll say, hey, I want to go look at this property. And so just like in the old days, we throw them in the car or we meet them at the house and we go through, and we realize that there's no way that they would be able to purchase this property if they really liked it. And we go in with that attitude that, hey, this is an educational process for the buyer so that we can show them a little bit about buying real estate. The buyers don't understand that they just can't go out to a property if they like it and buy it. The reality is that because of all the buyers that are out there and the competition that's available right now, you have to have those buyers pre-approved. And when you submit that offer, you have to have all the supporting evidence. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance in this marketplace. So what I teach is that before you meet with a buyer, before you sit down with them, before you spend any time with them, and this is even in setting them up on the MLS, on the auto emails for the properties, is you get them pre-approved. And we all know this, as the reality is until they're pre-approved, we don't even know what price of property that we should be searching for. So that's your first step. And what's great about working with Jonathan is that when you send him buyers, he will get back to you either on a daily or a weekly basis, depending on your volume of buyers that you're providing him, and will give you an update on those buyers. And he can tell, because what the buyers have to provide now, because of these full documentation loans that are required by lenders, is typically 2 years tax returns, W-2 pay stubs, any other income documentation on all their paperwork. And as you know, when you work with a motivated buyer, or even if you purchase a property yourself or refinance a property, usually within a day or two, you get all of that information to the lender. And so that's the type of buyer you want. And Jonathan will report back to you and say, hey, I sent them the list, a week ago, and I haven't heard anything, or I've only received, one piece of paper or whatever. So those are the types of buyers. You can make another contact with them and explain again that we need to get this pre-approval before we can move forward. But the reality is you only want to work with those buyers that are pre-approved and that are ready to go. Obviously, when you're prospecting, as I mentioned in our prospecting workshop, you have to have a method of getting these buyers. When I was first in the business, open house was my ticket. I did 3 to 4 open houses a week. My goal was to have 1 good buyer a week out of these 4 open houses. And I was able to do that. So after a period of a few months, I had a dozen buyers, and then it got to the point where you had to weed out the ones that either didn't return phone calls or didn't make appointments or didn't talk with the lender. So go into this up front only working with buyers that are pre-approved. Okay, so if I don't see any questions, comments here, so we're going to move ahead. So I'm assuming now that this buyer that you met, whether it was a referral or one that you picked up on part of your prospecting, that this buyer has been pre-approved. Jonathan has come back and said, okay, they're pre-approved for FHA at $600,000. So that's when you'll sit down, you'll make an appointment to sit down with them and go over this booklet at your first meeting. Typically, Jonathan will want to be there also. He'll have paperwork that they will have to sign. So you can, the 3 of you, or if it's a couple, can all meet and you can go through this process of what is needed to buy a home.
And a link right to his application too.
Oh, good. Yeah, and this is on our website. There's an application there that Jonathan will send them. Jonathan has some great online programs to get buyers started in doing their application. And again, I got to reiterate, if this is a serious buyer, they'll have all of this done in 24 hours versus, you know, some buyers that will take weeks to get paperwork in. So I'm hoping that you have lots of buyers and that you'll be able to weed through these. It's frustrating when I hear agents that you know, they might do 1 open house a month, or they're not doing any prospecting, and they get 1 buyer. They've had 1 buyer over the last 2 months, and they've been working with them now for 6 months, and they still don't have them pre-approved. And then they decide, oh, you know, we're gonna rent, or we're gonna move to Vegas or something. And then the agent gets all disillusioned and say, you know, this business sucks. When the reality is that the agent just is not doing enough prospecting and doesn't have his stream of clients coming in. You need to have lots of buyers coming in to be able to pluck out those that are the strongest and the most serious in order to be successful in this business. And this is one way to do that. Okay, so the buyers have been pre-approved. You've got this meeting set down. And when you sit down with them, you're going to ask them to sign an agency agreement and your buyer representation agreement. And basically what I do is I spend most of my time on this personal service agreement. And you basically just kind of read through this, edit it as you like, and say, hey, these are all the things, you know, Mr. Buyer, that we're going to do to help you find that home, right? And the other thing is that you've got to explain that they're not paying anything, that you get paid by the seller, so that they understand what this process is. And after you go through this, on your desk, you'll have our agency agreement that they sign, that they just acknowledge receiving a copy of. It's in this booklet. And also that buyer representation agreement that they sign. So Danny, let's scroll down and we'll go right into that paperwork. We have stuff also, there's a checklist here. When buyers are going through properties, they can look for, it gives you some information on what home warranties are. This is the agency form. And if you notice right in the middle in bold on that first page, right above where the buyer signs, in bold print. It says, "We acknowledge a copy of this." Go down a little bit more there. We acknowledge a copy. So all that these buyers are saying is that, hey, I'm receiving a copy of this, sign here. And as you guys know, as agents, basically this is a disclosure. It just says that a buyer's agent does this, and seller's agent does this, and dual agent does it. So it's just a disclosure as to what an agency relationship is. They're not committing to anything, they're just acknowledging that they're receiving a copy. And your explanation can be that quick, if not even quicker. The second page of that agency is just what the civil code is. More importantly, though, is this buyer representation agreement. And if you notice on zip forms now, this is the 07 form. So this is what, 14 years old. Really hasn't changed much. But today there's 3 different buyer representation, we call them buyer broker representation agreements now. And the one that I recommend that our agents use is the non-exclusive, not for compensation. The other 2 actually state that the buyer will pay the commission if not paid by the seller. And it's been my experience that it's difficult for buyers to understand this process. And my goal is to get buyers to sign this buyer representation agreement. Lorna, I saw a hand there. Was that a question? Okay, I'm going to move forward. And if you read through this, as I'm hoping all of you will, this is just a 2-page form, and it basically just kind of lays out what the buyer is going to work with you and help you find a home for them. And going back to the first page on this, Danny, if you notice, I think there may have been time frames. Yeah, so there's a time frame on this. On the new one, on the new buyer representation agreement, there are no dates as to when this starts and when it ends. So the buyer can cancel this at any time. But the buyer and the broker are agreeing to work together to find a property. And I like this because it makes the buyer sit down, it makes them sign an agency form, and it makes the TRG agent sit down and explain what they're going to do in helping them find their property. And in our workshops, in fact, I think Dan brought this up about a year ago when I was doing another buyer workshop, Dan Pilson, not Danny. It's like, well, why do you even use this form when there is nothing binding here for the buyer, right? And other than on, I think it's on item 5E here, which is in the middle of your screen, the buyer, this is one of the only important clauses in here, is that the buyer represents that he has not entered into an exclusive representation agreement with any other brokers. And what happens is that when a buyer signs this in the agency form, if they're working with other brokers, that will come out. And that's one of the purposes of getting them to sign this, because obviously if you're working with 5 buyers that are all pre-approved and you've got another buyer that's coming in that's working with 3 or 4 other agents out there, you just don't have time to deal with that. So again, that's rare, but most of the time they'll just sign, they'll sign this paperwork, and they're anxious to move forward and get into that home. Another reason why I like this form is, even if we were using the exclusive form and it talked about the commissions, that the buyer has to pay the 6% commission if the seller doesn't pay, and we go through and we explain all of that, it's first off, it's difficult for a buyer to understand that he may have to pay a commission. Secondly, on these buyer agreements, it's really hard to enforce these. And I always use listing agreements when we list a property and we're working with a seller. We know that the sellers, in order to sell their home, they're always going to sign a listing agreement. In fact, as agents, we're not going to work with them unless they sign this listing agreement, because we have to have a price, we have to have authority to put sign on the property, we have to know what type of commission the seller is going to pay, and that's all stated in that listing agreement. I don't know of any agents that will go out and sell a property without a listing agreement. However, most agents work with buyers without a buyer representation agreement. So I'm seeing a lot more agents use these now as the industry becomes more professional and agents become more professional. So always, please use a buyer representation agreement. And the reason I bring up that listing agreement is that even though that listing agreement states that, oh, I'm going to sell my house for $750,000 and I'm going to pay a 6% commission, if the seller decides after a day or a month or 3 months and says, hey, Derf, we've had the house on the market for 1 day and I really feel that I don't want to sell my home, or it's been on the market a few months, or we've had all this activity and I just don't want to sell, right? The reality is that TRG is going to cancel that agreement. Even though it states in that agreement that they need to pay us that 6% if they take the property off the market or make it unmarketable, we are not going to sue our client for that money because the seller changes his mind and decides not to sell. So that's why when we're working with sellers, I always give them that seller's guarantee that they can cancel anytime, even though they're committing to a 6-month listing. So that I'm hoping you understand that it's important that the buyer signs this to fill some commitment. We don't have to do the commission buyer representation agreement because we're not going to sue them if they go elsewhere. We may file an arbitration with another agent, or we may have another complaint, but we're not going to sue our client or our previous client over a contract. And when you're sitting down with a buyer, it makes it really easy for them to sign this, because it basically just says, hey, I'm going to help you find a property under these terms. And at the very top of this, you can put in different areas, the price range on that first page in that first paragraph as to where they're working. I don't see it right here, but on the new form, it actually lists areas and price range that the buyer is looking for. Okay, so those are the only 2 pages of paper, 2 forms, the buyer representation agreement and the agency agreement that the buyer has to sign in this meeting. And then you give them this booklet and you take down information as to type of property that they're looking for. What's great about this booklet is that you make this up, and I put in about, maybe 4 or 5 different zip forms that we'll be using. Obviously, you want to have a couple of disclosures in there, but most importantly is the purchase agreement. So as you know, the new purchase agreement is 10 pages. This one is from '06, and it was 8 pages. And by the way, guys, we're looking at 18 pages come next year on the new RPA. We actually have a draft of that that's coming out at the end of this year. So put in a copy of that purchase agreement. And what I tell them when I give them this booklet at the end of this meeting is I'll say, hey, take this home. It includes some of the paperwork that that's going to be required when you find that property. Our purchase agreement is now 10 pages, and it's important that you read through this so that you feel comfortable signing this when we find the property. So what happens is that when you find this property, whether it's the next week or the next month or the next year, right, the buyers have had this booklet sitting on their desk at home or in their bathroom or wherever. Chances are they may have glanced at it, but they really haven't studied it. And in all of my years, I've never had a buyer call me up and say, hey, Derf, on that 4th page of that purchase agreement, it said this, or on this FERPTA agreement, it asked for this. Why is that? Never had any questions. But what it does is it makes that buyer warm and fuzzy that you're giving them all of this paperwork in advance, so that when the time comes and you sit them down and you say, okay, we need to go through this 10-page purchase agreement, and I need you to initial and sign each of these pages, right? They're going to think, oh, gee, I've had this for the last week. Okay, where do I initial? And it makes the signing process go very smooth. And I always like to use the analogy of going in when you're buying a car and you see that 30-inch long page document that the car dealer says, and they say, okay, press hard on this form because you're making 3 copies, and then you turn it over. On the back page, there's another 3 feet of disclosures on the back page. There's literally more information when you're buying a car, or more disclosures in that, than on our 10-page purchase agreement. The problem, though, is that when you sit down to buy that car, you're thinking, oh, gee, now do I need to read through all this? And you have all of these questions going on. And obviously, when you're purchasing a house for hundreds of thousands of dollars, this is a much more important purchase. It's probably the biggest purchase that they've ever made in their lives. And if you can set them at ease and give them this paperwork in advance, so they have a chance to look at it and study it prior to signing, it'll make you much more professional in your presentation. Okay, so a couple other things. Danny's just showing here at the end of the page, you should have a profile. I'm real boring because all I've ever done in my life is real estate. So mine's all real estate, but the purpose of this profile is to set you apart from the other agents. It should be personal stuff. Hey, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? It doesn't have to be, in fact, I prefer it not to be all real estate related. Tell them that you like long walks on the beach, you like walking your dog, different types of hobbies. And this should be the start of your marketing program when you start branding yourself and marketing yourself in order to set yourself apart from other agents. So everybody should have that profile page done up. That's your homework. If you haven't done that, please do that for before our next week's workshop. Okay, so I just want to talk to you about working with these buyers. That's your first meeting with them, and you give them this booklet. In today's world, with the coronavirus, you're going to set them up with some other paperwork. You're going to set them up on the MLS, find out exactly, take notes as to the types of properties that they're looking for. Ask them, hey, are you looking for a big backyard? Do you want a small backyard? How many bedrooms, baths? And then get them set up on that auto email from our MLS. And you also want them, when you set that up, make sure that you get a copy of everything that the client sees, so that you'll have a chance to review it, because you will receive phone calls and says, typically it's like, hey, Derf, I just got that listing you sent me. It looks great over here on 220th Street. What do you think about it? And if you're out there on the beach and you haven't even seen it yet, it's not good. So have a chance to preview these listings, at least online, like your buyer is. When you set up that appointment, and again, I'm assuming now that the buyer's already been pre-approved, you're out there looking at properties, you are all ready to go with an offer when they find that home. And let me switch gears and talk a little bit about showing properties when you're working with these buyers. And I always flash back, and for those that have seen this buyer workshop before, I always tell them I was in my early 20s. We had a a listing. I was working out of the Gardena office. Back then, this was before computers, because I'm old. We had books that were handed out once a week, and we would get flyers on new listings. And every Friday, our Fridays were consumed with an office meeting and a caravan of the local properties. One of the neat things about pre-computer days and pre-technology as we know it today is that the different offices specialized in those neighborhoods. So my marketing area was typically just in maybe Gardena and Torrance. It was rare that I ever made it to Palos Verdes or San Pedro to look at properties. So you could specialize in that neighborhood and know more about what was going on, because every week you would go out and you would caravan these new listings. So we went out this Friday and we saw this new listing that came up. It was just a couple blocks away from the office. It was your typical 1950s home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Came on the market at, I think it was $90,000. And the market at that time was 95, maybe 100,000 for these 3-bedroom houses. This was a vacant house. It had new paint, new carpet, and it was really nice. And we're looking at this going, wow, this is a great listing. From everything else that we've seen, it was nice and clean. Everything was new inside. And so we were really excited about this property. So I'm doing floor time the next week at the office. You'll have to ask me later what that is. And I get this call from a much older couple. I think they were about 35, and they were looking for a new house in that Gardena area, something around 100,000. So, you know, I've got it. You know, the light bulb goes off in my head. It's like, wow, you know, hey, we just saw this new listing. It just came up on the market. Come on down, and we'll show it to you. So, you know, in the old days, you'd throw them in the car. You had no idea what they could qualify for. And you'd go out and show these properties and spend half the day driving around touring these homes. So I made an appointment. They came in. We went down the street. We used the lockbox. The house was vacant. I showed them this property. This is the best thing on the market. It was a great deal. I think it was $92,000, and the marketplace was a good $5,000 to $8,000 more than this. They walked around, looked at the property, and as I always ask my agents, you know, what do you think they said? Well, they didn't say, let's buy this house. They said, oh, Derf, this looks great. What else you got? Right? So I learned a lot from this showing when I was in my early 20s, because I realized that, you know, I've been looking at properties for a couple of years now. Every Friday we would caravan around our office, and I knew all of the properties that were for sale. And there was like 6 or 7 of them that were comparable to this. They were all more money. And I realized that, hey, my buyers, they like this house, but they don't have that level of education that I have on the marketplace. Not to the point of making a commitment in today's market to spend $500,000 to buy a house. These buyers have to be educated. They have to know what the marketplace is, right? So, you know, I told them, well, you know, this is a great buy. I'll make appointments and we'll go look at these other properties. So over the next week, we looked at the 6 other properties that were on the market, right? And so that they got up to the level of education that I'm at on the marketplace. And guess what? Yeah, this house sold. It was only $92,000. And as you know, there's never going to be another 3-bedroom house in Gardena for $92,000. So those buyers may still be looking for that out there. So the lesson to be learned here is you need to educate these buyers, and it's much easier today with the technology. You can get them signed up on the internet. review these properties. You can actually see which ones that they have interest in the properties that you sent them. But you also need to communicate with them, whether it's phone, text, email, and get some feedback. The goal is so that once they come across a property that they like, they realize that, hey, this is a good buy. And it may not be 92,000, but if we're looking at that buyer back then and we put them in the marketplace today at that price range, they're going to say, well, gee, I see everything else is at 95,000, and there's multiple offers on this. We should probably offer 95 or 96,000. And when that comes from the buyer and not having you to tell them to sell them on this property, you're way ahead of the game. So that's the process. You need to educate these buyers. The other story, I'm not seeing any comments, any questions. The other story I like to bring up is I had another older couple that had their first kid. He was in the military. He was working out of the base here in El Segundo Air Force. I think he was about 32, so he was much older than me at the time. They knew exactly what they wanted. They figured they were only going to be here for a couple of years. They were in that $100,000 price range. They were looking for something newer, and they wanted a townhome, and they were thinking Lawndale. So when I have a buyer like that that knows exactly what they want, it makes it much easier for me. It's more difficult today, obviously, as you know. If a buyer calls you up and says, yeah, I'm in that $1 million range and I want to buy something somewhere in the South Bay, right? Well, it would be much better if they said, hey, I've got $1 million and I want to be at South High School or West High School or something specific. I want to be within a mile of such and such place, versus the South Bay, because they can buy, for $1 million, you can probably get a studio on the beach, or you can get a 4 or 5 bedroom house in Carson. So you want to be as specific as possible with your buyers. So fortunately, this military family, they knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted to spend that $100,000, and they wanted Lawndale for that. So I went out, checked out all the properties. I did like a CMA, like I would for a seller. And there were about a dozen properties that had either sold or were active in that Lawndale marketplace. So what I did I did a CMA, and as you know, in your market analysis, it lists everything that's for sale and everything that's sold. And for the sale properties, I showed them some pictures. I gave them the printouts of the CMA, and we drove by a couple of those properties that had sold. A couple of them were apartment style. They were in an apartment complex. In fact, back then, these were actually apartments that were converted to condos that had sold for that 100,000 price range. We weren't able to go into them because they were already sold. And as you guys probably know or have heard over the years, you don't want to take buyers out and show them 10 different properties. The magic number is, what I've learned over the years is like 3 properties. I would say 2 to 4 is nice. A lot of times now, because everybody can see these virtual tours on a property, that it's possible that you may only have to show them 1 home because they have educated themselves by looking at all these other listings, and they know what the values are now. So they're spending a lot of that time on their own instead of with you showing properties. So just so that you understand what the process is, I showed them that CMA. We drove by a couple of the sale properties. I picked out 3 homes that I had previewed to show them. And I set it up to where the worst of what I considered, I think there was 4 or 5 properties that were for sale. I showed them the worst first, a nice one second, and what I thought would be the best one last. I wanted them to be able to see what the marketplace was so that they knew that they were getting good value when they finally saw that last home. So when we walked into that first home, and it was a condo, it just had one common wall on the side. It needed paint and it needed carpet. And I remember one of the bedrooms was painted black, and the carpet was real shabby. And they were looking at this and they were real positive. The buyers were positive in saying that, well, we can replace the carpet. Carpet's not that expensive, and we can paint. And that would actually be a very nice condo. And so I'm thinking, oh yeah, I agree that that's really all that this place needs. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, just wait till they get to see number one. We're at number 3 right now, and they're showing positive signs that they really want to buy. So the second one was even better. It was painted, had nice carpet. It was more of an apartment style versus the townhouse. And I know that they wanted that. They wanted more privacy, but this was a very nice unit. It showed really well. And so they were real excited. They went through this and they said, oh, this is great. I realize that this is an apartment style, but this is really nice inside. And I said, well, let's wait. We've got another one scheduled to show. So this third unit, and again, this is Lawndale, where this was actually a patio home. So it only had one common wall that was on the garage. And it was done in that typical shag carpet back then. It had a lot of oak. It was a 2-story. But when you walk into this, it was beautiful. I mean, it was a really nice home. So I opened the door, I let them walk in, and I didn't say anything. I let them walk around. They came back to me and they said, Derf, we love this house. What do we do to buy it? Okay. So flashback to that time before when I showed those other buyers that house down the street, and you can see the difference in how to professionally show a property. You've got to be able to educate those buyers before they can make that decision. And you show them properties and educate them to the point where that decision is theirs. You're not pushing them. I'm not the type of person that goes to the property and says, oh, look at this room and look at all these great things in this room. I'm not that type of agent. There's a lot of successful agents out there that can do that. That's not my style. I prefer to educate them in advance, show them what's available out there so they will make that decision themselves. Okay, so that's a process when showing homes. In today's marketplace, what's key to getting that offer accepted is having that paperwork done correctly and having a presentation to the seller that's going to make your offer look better than anything else. Rather than go through all the details in that, when you have that buyer, when you do that paperwork, talk to Danny and me and let us review your paperwork and your presentation of that offer. I'm seeing lots of agents at TRG that are writing multiple offers and never getting anything accepted. So you have to be aggressive on the price, and you have to be aggressive on your time frames so that seller is going to pick you over the other 5 or 10 offers. Okay, and so a couple other notes here in closing. We have 5 different buyer booklets. So every time that you meet with a buyer, give them a different booklet. So it's more education for that buyer. And these are all available as downloads. In fact, if you look at the bottom right here where the arrow is, for condo buyers, how to avoid paying too much, home buyers, how to buy a home in a changing market. These are all professionally done. All you have to do is personalize that front page and you can print up a stack of these for your buyers. Make sure that you have your profile done in the back also. And the idea is that you're educating these buyers. You give them, these are the booklets that you give to them after you've already done your sit down. And even though you have a buyer representation agreement, I've never heard of a buyer wandering to another agent because of all this work that you've done. Most agents, it's like, oh yeah, here's the property, go check it out. Do you want to buy it? And that's it. So you can see how buyers, they don't have that relationship developed like they will with you going through these steps. Okay, so use those booklets when you're meeting with the buyer, get that profile done. There's other tips there, inserts that you can put in. If you do a team approach in your marketing, and I'll be glad to help you personally develop yours. Any questions here, guys? Any comments?
Also mentioned for the buyer's representation agreement, it's a lot easier now since you have to send the PAD form.
If you just split that form at the same time, most of the time they just sign everything because they want to do the property. You can either list the city or just that property individually. That makes it very easy to get the buyer representation agreement signed.
Okay, I don't hear any questions or comments. All right, guys, make it a great day. Talk to you soon.